this proves that it has to be some external agent or some God outside of the universe to create and sustain everything that is within the universe. And so then the question becomes, how do we get, for the Christian who's maybe doing some evangelism and then they've laid out this argument, the person whom they're speaking with understands it and they think it's a good argument, it's fair. Where does the Christian now go once they finish this argument?
Daquan, do you have any pets?
No, I don't actually. Do you?
You know, have you ever had any pets?
I had.
Yeah?
Yeah. I had 3 dogs and 1 cat, but the cat died when I was in high school. I found her in the backyard just
For our audio listeners, Daquan just mimicked what a dead cat looks like for us. Well, that's cool. My wife and I got a dog a couple weeks ago, and I started a new bit with this dog where, so to be clear, I only speak English, right? I'm one of those guys. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
English is my first and only language.
Yeah.
And I decided at some point that our dog only understands Spanish. And so I've been kind of running around the house recently, talking to our dog in only Spanish. And instead of being like, we have food up, or like, go eat your food, I'll be like, gumbo e agua e burritos, dos enchiladas. And I'm like talking about like all the Mexican food that I know because it's the only Spanish words that I know. Yeah. And I'm going to train him to eventually only respond to Spanish words.
Well, that means you need to frequently know how to speak fluent Spanish.
No, I'm just going to guess.
You're going to guess? Okay.
Yeah, like I know hurry up means vamonos because I used to play soccer. Some of the parents would yell that from the sideline at their kids. All right, well, anyways, glad to hear about your dead cat there, Daquan. Put a real damper in my pamper this morning. But what are we going to be talking about this fine morning?
Okay, so today we're going to be talking about one of the few arguments for the existence of God, which is the cosmological argument, right? And so we're going to work through maybe like what that is, maybe how to explain that to those on the street or those your classmates and whatnot, and why this argument like is important. And so maybe you can start off with just like, what is the cosmological argument?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is, whenever we think of arguments for the existence of God, this is probably the first one that comes to mind for a lot of people. And in this argument, it's difficult, I think, to reason to the Christian God specifically. This is more of a theistic argument, which means that we are arguing simply that there is a God. And then you can use other arguments, perhaps from the resurrection or something like that, to kind of get your way to the Christian God in Jesus. But it is certainly important, especially for those that might be atheistic or agnostic, who might not believe in anything that's supernatural, to kind of get the wheels turning up there and get to a point where you can both agree that there is a supernatural being out there. There is a cause. And so the fundamental driving principle of the cosmological argument, which is a big, scary word, is that anything that is in motion or anything that was caused had a cause. Anything that is in motion was set in motion by something. And you and I are only here because we have parents that brought us into this world. And then they're only here because of their parents. And if you trace that all the way back, we can find a beginning point, right? That there was some sort of initial cause that caused everything around us. That we wouldn't have the world as we know it today unless there was a cause. So since the world, if the world, I guess, has been caused, if the world had a beginning and it is a caused thing, then it means that it has a cause. That there's something that caused the world to come into existence and become set in motion. And so that's the driving principle behind this argument, is that we live in a world that is in motion. And so it must have been set in motion by something. And our argument is that that something is God.
Yeah, that's really good. I think it may be also helpful to just mention Dr. William Lane Craig's maybe syllogism that he has for this argument. It may be easy for the listeners to follow. Premise 1.
On our podcast, it's a syllogism.
It's a syllogism?
Yeah.
Okay, it's a syllogism, guys. And so the syllogism that Dr. Craig offers for this argument is premise 1, all things that all things that began to exist were created. the universe began to exist, therefore the universe was created. And so I think this syllogism is a way to help maybe those understand the argument and be able to track it probably a lot better and be able to explain it to those who have never
absolutely.
heard it.
And I would recommend maybe, if you're explaining it to people,
you
just
don't
kind of
premise one.
You don't walk up, push your glasses up and be like, oh, premise one. But it certainly is helpful for kind of framing it in our minds. I think. So let's take this point by point. What was the first part of that syllogism?
So the first premise is all things that began to exist were created. Now, obviously this is true of anything that we see around us. And we would have to ask ourselves, why is it that the universe would be any different if everything that we know and see, touch, smell, all of these things began to exist? And if it began to exist, that implies it was created.
And right out the gate, I want to make a point here. And this is going to be a question that I'm sure comes up in people's minds as we're talking about this argument, is that it's a very important phrase in there, that everything that was created had a creator. Right. And so the question is, right, if everything has a cause, then who created God? Right. What is the cause of God? If we're going to claim that the world began, then we have to also assume that God began. But it's a very important distinction between what we call in kind of the philosophical or even scientific world, the contingent and the necessary. So a contingent means like maybe on Shark Tank, right? You see that people make deals that like, contingent on you guys building a ton of factories and calling me Mr. Wonderful, then I'll invest in your company or something like that, right? Basically saying that like this, whatever's about to happen relies on something first happening. Right. So we are contingent beings because we are contingent on our parents giving birth to us. Right. And so there's a distinction here between us and God, anything that was created, and an uncaused cause, right? And that's what we call a necessary being. In order for anything to exist, there must be a necessary cause, something that has existed for eternity, that was not created, that was not caused, that was not set in motion. And that thing, that entity, we call God.
Right.
So the reality is that if there was something that created God, then God, as we know him, would no longer be God.
Right.
God no longer possesses the qualities of being eternal and omnipotent, right? But rather, whatever created God would become God. But in Christian theism, at least, we hold to this idea that God is eternal, God is all-powerful, and that God is the first cause, right? God caused everything to come into existence that is now in motion. Right.
I think that was a great explanation for a common objection that is given to the cosmological argument, as you framed, well, if all things were created, then who created God? But as you pointed out, well, that's not even our claim. Our claim is all things that began to exist were created. God had no beginning. Right?
And so the question now is, did the world begin to exist? And you'd be surprised at how contentious this idea is. So this kind of goes into the second premise of your little silly thing.
So premise 2 would be the universe was created. Right.
Yeah, and so there are a lot of different avenues for discussion on this topic. And nowadays, the general consensus in the scientific and philosophical communities is that the world did begin to exist. But it wasn't always this way. But I think that especially the scientific advances that we've been able to make and being able to discern the fact that the universe is expanding and that we can kind of centralize it to one point in time and one point in space even, where there was some sort of first cause whenever everything kind of came into existence. The scientific way that we've done this, and the one that we're probably more versed in, which is the philosophical side of things, kind of shows that it is impossible for the universe to have existed for infinity past. And so,
and this would be
Daquan, I'll pass it off to you here first, because I have a lot of fun different thought experiments that kind of detail this stuff. But go ahead and what are your thoughts on this kind of premise here?
Yeah, so I think if an atheist or some person that would object to the existence of God, they probably would take more issue with premise 2 than they would with premise 1. And so what we have here is alternate explanations to explain the universe. And so because they would disagree that the universe was created, because anything created implies a creator, which, by the way, I use I use this in conversation on the street. I would oftentimes say, if I see a building, I know there has to be, and usually they fill in the blank and they'll say a builder, right, or an architect, right? And so if I see a painting, I know there has to be a what, and they usually say a painter. And so again, if I see creation, that implies that there has to be some kind of creator. But again, the second premise is what most atheists would probably object to. But I think you hinted at something that's really important. It seems like the scientific evidence as well seems to suggest that the universe came from a finite point in the past and is expanding, right? And then you also touched on the cosmological argument, which means and you use that, and correct me if I'm wrong, to illustrate the point that the universe could not be eternal and always existing, right? Because it would be infinite. And one of the common examples that's given here is if it was infinite, we wouldn't arrive to today, right? And so there's a few issues here, and specifically with the expanding. This is a study done by Edwin Hubble. And most times we see this in the acronym SURGE that's used for this excuse me, for this argument. Typically with the U in SURGE stands for universal expansion, right? And so Edwin Hubble with his study recognized that the universe is expanding. And again, if it's expanding, that implies that it expanded from a point somewhere in the past. So like all these things come together, as you mentioned, to point to that the universe was created, and even the signs and obviously some residual effects point to, again, that the universe was created.
And here's a moment for one of our fun facts. Give us the fun fact theme song, Daquan. All right, fun fact right here. Sorry, Joseph Smith of Mormon fame. Was a very big proponent, especially in his King Follett discourse, of the fact that the universe is actually eternal and that God has existed for eternity alongside creation, meaning that time has existed for infinity past, and that the way that they believe that kind of we arrived at this point in time is really vague. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in a second.
That's really good.
But I want to point out here that in order for us to, whenever we get to understand that it is impossible for us to have an infinite amount of time before this point in time, is a logical contradiction. But it is a fundamental belief of the Mormon faith. And so this is something that we can bring up even in conversations with them as well, which I think is important. So,
I think it's really interesting because it poses a fundamental problem with their view of God, right?
Oh, absolutely. That's a topic for another time.
Sure.
We don't want to get too off track here. We'll have a whole episode dedicated to that. But so here's what I would posit, right? From a philosophical perspective. And a mathematical perspective, right? We love math on this podcast. There cannot be an actually infinite number of anything. And what I mean by that is you cannot have an infinite number of minutes that have extended far back into the universe, right? Let me give you an example, right? There's this guy named, I think it was David Hilbert. I know his name was Hilbert. I think his first name was David.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, me neither. But whatever. Hilbert came up with this theoretical thought experiment called Hilbert's Hotel. Where he said that he asked us to imagine, and if you're listening with us, go ahead and close your eyes and imagine with us, that there's a hotel with a finite number of rooms, right? Let's say there's 100 rooms. If the hotel is at max capacity and a new traveler came in, they're like, hey, I need a room. They'd say, sorry, we're full. They'd turn them away because they're full for the night. They've reached their limit. Now, imagine that there is an infinite hotel with an infinite number of rooms. And this hotel is also at max capacity, and there's an infinite number of people residing inside of this awesome hotel. Really cheap deal on this hotel, incredible area. People are flocking to this hotel. So, whenever the traveler arrives to this hotel that's at max capacity, instead of being rejected, rather, the hotel clerk at the front desk asks everyone in their rooms right now to move up one room. So the person in room 1 goes to room 2, the person in room 2 goes to room 3, and so on. And in doing so, he creates an extra room where even though the hotel was just at max capacity, he has added another person to this. And so on. And there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of contort this in some way, right? For example, you can say that the hotel was at max capacity and it was full of an infinite number of people, but then another infinite number of people, infinity more people, showed up on the doorstep and asked for rooms.
Right.
And so the hotel clerk asked for every person in the hotel to move to the room number that is double their room. So room 1 moved to room 2 moved to room 4, etc. And in doing so, doubled the amount of space available in the hotel that was already max capacity, and has added another infinity number of people to this hotel. And in our minds, this might be able to make sense, but in reality, this is absolutely impossible. It is impossible whenever we start dealing with infinite numbers of things for there to be an actually infinite number of anything. So if we're talking about minutes, right, or just any sort of construct of time, for us to say that there is an infinite number of minutes extending back beyond us, right, back into history, and that we have arrived at this point in time, it would be an impossibility. Like, it would be a logical contradiction for us to say that there's an infinite number of minutes before us.
Yeah.
The other way of kind of thinking about this maybe is that, let's say that there was this huge trail of dominoes that extended as far to the east as we can see, as far to the west as we can see. And we can see that these dominoes are slowly toppling each other over, and that as they're passing by us, that these dominoes are falling over into this line, right? We can imagine this is like time, right? That as time moves on, it is slowly knocking these dominoes over. We can assume, based off that if we go into the area where the dominoes have already fallen over, that we could trace it all the way back to an initial moment where the first domino was pushed over in this trail of dominoes.
Right.
It would not follow that it was an infinite number of dominoes that have been falling over, because in order for us to arrive at any given point in these dominoes, there must have been a beginning.
Yeah.
Right? It's, if you've worked with maybe calculus before, you know that it's impossible to have start at negative infinity and then add any finite number to negative infinity and get to an actual number. Negative infinity plus 500 is still negative infinity, right? And so all that to say,
Yeah.
math, science, philosophy, all kind of show us that there was a beginning. There's a beginning to time, there's a beginning to this world. And like we mentioned, in order for something to have a beginning, there must have been some sort of cause.
Yeah, it has to be a cause. Again, it's true of everything. And I think you laid it out like so well. I think it was really good. Now,
The way you said that made me feel a little bit insecure about myself.
why is that?
Because you're like, so well.
It was good.
Thanks, man.
Okay. And so the conclusion is the universe was created. Right. And so this is pretty simple. Again, if the universe was created, again, this implies that there has to be a creator, or we could even say an arbiter of the universe. And if there's an arbiter of the universe, this agent, external agent, because like we mentioned earlier, this is the case for theism. So we have not yet gotten to the point where we can say this is Yahweh. So this external agent has a few qualities in order to create the universe out of absolutely nothing, right? These are things that we go over all the time, such as this external agent has to be eternal, has to be all powerful, be able to create everything out of nothing, all knowing or all intelligent. You have to be, man, I'm blanking on, personal. I would add personal. I think is really interesting. I think
And you have to be non-physical as well, right? Like spirit.
non-physical, yeah. And so when I mean personal, I don't know if there was confusion, but I think to make the decision to create. And so, so a chair doesn't make any decisions, right? Because it's impersonal.
Yeah,
right.
that's good.
Right. And so what are some other, I'm blanking on
Immaterial.
the-
Sorry,
Immaterial.
that's what I'm trying to get at. Yeah, because if he created all matter, then he cannot be matter himself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so here are a few important characteristics that this external agent has to have, right? What we see is that most philosophers, if we just list these characteristics, most philosophers will call this God. But now the question is, okay, this doesn't prove that Christianity is true, and we would agree. We would say that at the very least, this proves that it has to be some external agent or some God outside of the universe to create and sustain everything that is within the universe. And so then the question becomes, how do we get, for the Christian who's maybe doing some evangelism and then they've laid out this argument, the person whom they're speaking with understands it and they think it's a good argument, it's fair, where does the Christian now go once they finish this argument?
Oh, well, I mean, personally, I normally go to the resurrection.
Yeah.
And I say that if there was this guy, Jesus, who claimed to be God and who claimed to have the power of God, who claimed to have the authority of God, and then was able to rise from the dead in one of the most historically, I guess factually evident, what am I thinking of? The most historically credible events in all of history.
Yeah.
Then that's a pretty good indicator that we are able to know this God and that this person who claimed to be God actually has some sort of wisdom or insight into who this creator, who we cannot identify with just the cosmological argument.
Yeah.
But he gives us insight into who this creator God actually is and how we can have a relationship with it.
Yeah.
So that's where I go with that.
Yeah.
But before we get into the weeds on that, I want to ask, how would you respond maybe to an atheist or an agnostic who would say, yeah, I agree that there was a cause to the world, and that cause was the Big Bang, or it was just like two, molecules of some sort that collided in the perfect way to create all of this?
Yeah, and so Dr. Frank Turk would say he believes in a Big Bang too. He just knows who the Big Banger is. And so I think I would agree with Dr. Frank Turk.
Yeah.
I know who the Big Banger is, and the Big Banger is God. And simply because the Big Bang is not autonomous, it doesn't like happen on its own, right? And so whether it's two molecules in motion, or what I hear from some is that something and something else came together and then caused the Big Bang, well, then that caused the Big Bang. And then the question then becomes, like we kind of laid out earlier, then what caused those molecules or anything else that then resulted in the Big Bang?
Yeah.
And so we get back on this, then what caused that and what caused that? I would say that the evidence seems to suggest that, again, an external agent, especially if we maybe define the Big Bang as something like the beginning of all time, space, and matter. So that means, going back to the characteristics of this external agent has to be timeless, spaceless, and immaterial in order to create, right?
Yeah.
And so I would push back and say that's not, based on what we laid out, I don't think it's a good objection, just because it doesn't fit maybe some of the scientific.
Well, the question always becomes, if it was two pieces of matter that collided and caused all of this to appear,
right?
Where did those two particles come from?
Exactly.
Right? And you have to ask that question until you finally arrive at something or someone that created ex nihilo, or out of nothing.
Right.
And that's just the reality of it. You can throw multiverses at it, you can throw time and chance at it all you want, but at the end of the day, you can't just have nothing and then suddenly have something without some sort of cause.
Right. And I think, going back to the personal point that I made before, like, again, personal beings make decisions to create. Like, the Big Bang is not personal. It can't make a decision to happen and then create all that it does. Like, it has to be something. It has to be something external to that.
Well said.
Yeah. Sorry, you're gonna.
Well, I was gonna close this out, but you've.
Oh, okay. I was just gonna mention, I guess, really quick, that typically where I go, like, after I kind of lay out the cosmological argument and they understand it and they think it's fair, I would say that this is only for monotheistic religions, right? And so what are the major monotheistic religions in the world? We see that's Christianity is one, Islam is another, and Judaism. And so then I can ask the question, what is the difference between these monotheistic religions? And that's Jesus, their belief on Jesus. And I think you got to the biggest thing. We believe that Jesus died and rose from the grave. And there seems to be a ton of historical evidence that supports that claim. And now, if the other monotheistic religions do not make the same claim, and it therefore not consistent with the evidence, then I think we need to take issue with that and pointing to Christianity then being true. So kind of what we hinted at in the beginning and that you fleshed out, the cosmological argument is not meant to be some kind of knockout blow. But what it can do for you is help establish that there is some external agent that exists outside of the universe, or that theism is true. And then once you do that, you have to make a shift to maybe a different argument that you may want to use to establish that Christianity is true.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's only Christian theism that can make sense of the world that we see today,
Yeah.
the words that we use, the morality that we sense, and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
And so if you want to learn more about that, who this God is and how you can defend our belief as Christians, then be sure to tune into our other episodes. Daquan actually hits the Quan in one of our episodes, so be sure that you go and find that one.
Yeah.
It's pretty incredible. But Daquan, go ahead and give us a little poem to close us out today.
I don't have a poem, but I do want to probably say one more thing. and that's just what's amazing is when we look at the Psalms, and for example, when we look in the Psalms and we see that God is aware of every hair in our head, and that even when we go to maybe Psalms 8, and the psalmist asks the question, who is God that he is mindful of man? It is this God who has created the universe and all the inner workings of the universe, who knows you by name. And he knows you so well that he came in the person of Jesus, died on the cross, so that you may know forgiveness of sins. This is a God who knows you and knows you far more than anyone else ever could. And so I think this, to be known is to be truly loved. And you can be fully known with God. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
All right, fine, I'll do it. When Daquan closes quoting Psalms, he thoroughly eases all of my qualms about God, the universe, and everything.
Yeah.
It really makes me want to dance and sing.
Well, you should dance.
Thank you.
Okay.
So we'll see everybody next time. Hope your week is sublime.
There you go.
Thank you very much.